Nigeria, Africa's most populous nation for years now, has been grappling with severe food crisis. Millions of Nigerians are facing food insecurity, with rising food prices and dwindling purchasing power exacerbating the situation. Climate change, insecurity, economic challenges are compounding the problems, leaving many vulnerable to hunger and malnutrition. And despite several conversations around investing and growing the agric belt, little has been seen in terms of impact, yields, and price drop. This morning, farmer Samson Ogbole, team lead Eupepsia Place Limited, Soilers Farm Limited, right there in Abeokuta, Ogun State, joins me to talk more about this. Thank you so much, Farmer Samson, for joining us on Business Edge.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So according to reports, nearly 31.8 million Nigerians are already at risk of acute food insecurity. Help us paint a clearer picture of the situation.
All right. So to make this make sense, when we say 33 million represents maybe about 15% of the population. And to make that understandable for people, it means that out of 100 people you see in a gathering, 50 of them are at the edge of acute hunger. And it's important people understand that we are not saying the other 85% are fine. No. Out of that 85%, there are issues, but there are 15% already at that point, where by next year they are entering acute hunger, meaning they are not guaranteed once a day food. They are not guaranteed where their next meal will come from. So for every 100 people that you see, 15 people out of that are at the risk of entering the point where they are not sure where their next meal will come. And the problem with that is there is a popular saying that says, a hungry man is an angry man, which means when they get to that point where hunger becomes a mainstay, they are willing to do anything to eat because they are not even sure where the next meal will come from. So whatever it is, whether legal or illegal, they would want to do it to secure their next meal. Whether it is right or wrong is no longer the question for them. They move away from a place of hope to a place of survival. And at survival point, that is animalistic instinct coming to play, and they lose their humanity because it's about survival and no longer living.
Oh, okay, so when we now look at food insecurity and the factors, earlier on I talked about climate change, insecurity, economic challenges, as you have rightly confirmed. But then if you are going to look at the issues, which one would you say are the top three for you, and what has been government intervention so far in dealing with those perennial factors?
So it depends on whose perspective we're trying to look at this from. How do I mean? Are we trying to look at this from the consumer's perspective to say, why are we food insecure? Or are we looking at it from the farmer's perspective? Because the top reasons behind food insecurity would differ from both perspectives. So from the farmer's perspective, there is the fact that they do not have a market that they can bank on. How do I mean? For a farmer, most Nigerian farmers are gambling as a business. So let me explain that this way. If I am into any other business, I do not have total control over my input cost, but I have absolute control over how I sell my output. But for a farmer, they do not control their input cost, and they do not also control their output cost. So that instability in the market forces, it's a big issue for the farmer because he or she is not sure whether what they are growing, they are going to sell profitably or at a loss when it is time to get to the market. So for the farmer, number one issue is the market. Number two is inputs. Now, why do I say input? Because I know that people will be saying, why are you not saying security and all of that? Security affects every business. But when it comes to input, there is accessibility to the right input, There is affordability for the right input, because there are two different things. It is one thing to say I am buying fertilizer. It's another thing to know that the fertilizer I bought is genuine. The number three major issue for the farmer is affordable finance. Because you realize that if you look at the MPR given by the CBN for the past 10 years, look at the way it has increased constantly and the cost of raising funds for anything. So you want to borrow money from the bank as a farmer, then compare that vis-a-vis the cost of food today. You would realize that the rate at which inflation has happened in Nigeria compared to the rate at which food price has gone up is not commensurate, because price of food is still relatively cheap compared to the inflation that is happening. If the price of food were to match the rate of inflation, more Nigerians will be hungry. So farmers are basically they're providing subsidy with their poverty for food to remain cheap. So farmers need to be able to access affordable funds with proper moratorium. Not telling the farmer borrow money on Monday, start paying by Tuesday. No. What is it growing? How long will it take for that thing to mature? We also need to start looking at, if this is a business, this farmer that is asking for this money, how will they survive before they reach harvest? So for the farmer, these are their main issues. For the consumer, it's a different script for the consumer.
Okay.
Because for the consumer, looking at availability, affordability, accessibility from the consumer's perspective. So the major drivers of food insecurity varies from depending on where you are on the value chain. Are you producing?
Okay.
Are you processing? Or are you just a consumer?
Okay, so we look at it from the farmer's end. You talked about adequate funding, and you talked about inputs, you talked about one other thing you mentioned, I can't quite recollect right now. But the bottom line is that, the Nigerian government has come out to say there have been massive investments in the agri sector. I'm talking about this current administration since its inception in terms of providing credit funds for farmers, in terms of providing enabling environment, in terms of providing security for them. Is it that these efforts have not been enough? Is it that it's been sabotaged? Is it that there's probably something that is actually inhibiting what is being invested into the sector compared to what we're supposed to be seeing as of now? Where is the link?
Well, the real problem still remains that it is one thing to say you have a solution. It's another thing for the solution to meet the problem. So, for example, commercial banks today are giving out loan at about 30-something%. The minimum you will get is maybe 26, 27%. The question is, what is the farmer's profit? That is on one hand. Two, we need to be honest and tell ourselves that most Nigerians are fed because of the effort of smallholder farmers. How much impact how is that loan getting to the smallholder farmer? It's not, because you would hear, for you to get this money, you need to have this for moratorium, for collateral, this for collateral, and so on and so forth. They do not have these things, which means they do not have access to these incentives. Rather, what you see most of the time that you get government from the past, what they've always done is you share fertilizers. Fertilizers cannot be a solution because you did not even do soil tests to know that the fertilizers you are sharing is the best for the soil that the farmer is farming. That is like saying, we know Nigerians fall sick. Tomorrow we are sharing malaria drugs, any kind of malaria drug. How does that stop people from falling sick? It does not help, because the fundamentals has not been taken care of. A few months ago, there was the whole joke on social media of government will soon share palliative. The question is, who is producing? Is it a different thing if you're even saying farmers in Ogun, farmers in Oyo, farmers in Kano? Let's bring you together, produce these things for palliative. You now know you are helping the real farmers. So there are fundamental problems that needs to be taken up first before you start building on that. That has not been done. That is why we are still not able to see the good that is being pushed by the government, because the foundation is wrong. So we are building on a faulty foundation.
And we also, hear that there is also the issue around post-harvest losses. And I'd like to ask if there's any intervention. How much of an issue is that? And if there's been any intervention in terms of policies or implementation on part of government to deal with that?
Thank you for that. So let me put that this way. In Nigeria, our post-harvest loss stands at between 30 to 50%. Now, what that means is, if I have 1 million naira to farm, as an example, 300,000 naira to 500,000 naira of that money is going to waste because of post-harvest loss. Put a comma there. If I am going to collect loan at 30%, what that simply means is, because I am taking loan at 30%, it means 30% loan plus 30% waste. As a farmer, I am already 60% in debt. That in itself is a big issue. How can we start looking at solving this? First and foremost, we need better road networks from the farms to the urban cities. Better road networks to get to the market quickly. That is on one part. We need proper storage systems. But this looks like an Herculean task because they would say, oh, this would cost a lot. Then we need proper education for the farmers. How do I mean? If you grow tomatoes right, if you follow all the global gap rules for growing tomatoes and that tomatoes is properly grown, a properly grown tomatoes can spend 3 weeks in your house without the use of any refrigerator or anything. It can be on your shelf and it is still fresh like it left the farm. So we have the issue of crops are not even properly grown, so their shelf lives are already reduced. That is on one part. Number two is we need proper consumer education. Proper consumer education to tackle food waste, because you realize the farmer knows that if my tomatoes does not look a certain way, I cannot get good money for these tomatoes. Because it is one thing to tell people, oh, let's look at processing. Let's turn tomatoes to flakes. The question is, how many Nigerians will buy tomato flakes? There is still that misconception of, oh, if it is tomato flakes, it is for the poor. The rich should use the paste. The rich should use the, the fresh version of the tomatoes. So there is a lot of consumer education needed that the product looks wonky, that the product does not look like fine, does not mean the nutritional content of that product is reduced. Because if we are not able to tackle some part from the consumer part, then some part from the farmer's part on how to grow right, the one that depends on government may be a hard thing to push. But the easier ones to push is farmers, you grow right, consumer, buy whatever you see as long as you know it is healthy. It does not have to look fine to be healthy.
That's quite interesting. Farmer Samson, we may need to draw curtain on the conversation for now, but then we'll still look at some other areas some other time on the show, because we need to also look at mechanized farming, technologies that are needed to drive growth in terms of production in the sector. But then I want to appreciate you so much, Farmer Samson Ogbole, Team Lead, Eupepsia Place Limited, of course, right here in Abeokuta, Ogun State. It was nice talking to you on the show.